Hello and welcome to the Bellevue School District School Board meeting. Today is Thursday, November 4th, 2021. We'll begin with roll call. I'm Francine Wiest.
Carolyn Watson.
Christine Chu.
Erica Malie.
Seema Serafan.
Mike Dover, Superintendent.
All right, and then today we have Trinity Yoon. She's an 8th grader and ASB president at Taiyi Middle School, and she'll be leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And can you lead us in the land acknowledgement, please?
We acknowledge, honor, and respect that our broad community of Bellevue School District students, families, educators, and staff live and learn on the traditional indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples. We thank the caretakers for this land who have lived here and continue to do so since time immemorial.
Thank you. And with that, that brings us to item 1.4, which is approval of the agenda. I move that we approve the agenda.
Second.
Is there any discussion, changes? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, I have 5 ayes. That brings us to item 1.5. Trinity, student update.
Hello, my name is Trinity Yoon and I am an 8th grader at Taiyi Middle School. First, I would like to thank the Bellevue School District board members for inviting me to the meeting today and providing me with this amazing opportunity. At Taiyi, I am currently the ASB president. I direct the ASB cabinet meetings, connect with other members of the Taiyi community, and help plan school assemblies, festivals, spirit weeks, and fundraisers, and other fun events. Currently, we are preparing for the Veterans Day Assembly, which will be on November 9th. Although it will just be a recording that students will watch with their classmates during school due to COVID-19 restrictions, we have guest speakers, input from Taiyi's band, orchestra, and choir, and have a fun activity for students to honor their veterans after the assembly. We are also planning for a mask fundraiser and winter festival that will happen after the Veterans Day Assembly. The ASB cabinet is also considering ideas to rebuild our school spirit. Since we are coming back from learning virtually for over a year, we hope to make Taiyi a place and community where everyone feels welcomed and included. I am also the president of Taiyi's Yearbook Club and Future Problem Service Club, and am a web leader. My participation in these activities have helped me learn to become a student who is open-minded, curious, inclusive, and caring. Also, I have heard from many Taiyi community members that they are really glad to be back to in-person learning and are enjoying their time learning with other classmates and teachers. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Trinity. I'm going to ask you a question. We've added asking one question to our student updates. You're the first where we're doing this officially, so I'm going to give you a choice of 2 questions. One is, what is the one thing that you or the ASB believe would be most supportive of students for this year? If you're not ready for that one, the other one is maybe you could tell us a little bit about the process, especially since it is Native American Heritage Month, of Taiyi selecting a new mascot.
Oh, okay. So I can go with both actually. So for the first question, I feel like some more social events, obviously they have to be COVID-19 safe, but social events that connect students socially, not just through like their laptops, are really helpful during these times. Like I mentioned before, to build our school spirit, I think that will be really helpful. And for the second question about selecting the Taiyi mascot, so first we sent out a form to all of the Taiyi community members, parents, teachers, staff members, and students, and they all filled it out with one choice of their opinion or idea for our school mascot. And then we had a committee for selecting the mascot. I was also part of the committee, and we selected top, I believe it was 7. And then out of those 7, based on some characteristics that we thought would greatly represent our school, we sent those out back to the school body, and then they voted and our final decision was the Thai Timberwolves. So now we're the Thai Timberwolves. And then afterwards, we sent out a form to create a mascot logo for our school, and then that just recently ended. Just this week actually, and our final logo has been decided as well.
Great. Well, thank you for leading us through all of that, as well as your update. We really appreciate it and enjoy hearing from students. And we lost her. Oh, no, she's back. And so thank you for that. You are welcome to stay, but we know students are very busy. And so you are also welcome to sign off. And again, we thank you so much for participating in our meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right, and that brings us to item 1.6, the acknowledgements, which are posted in the agenda. As I noted, it is Native American Heritage Month, and we celebrate and acknowledge a variety of holidays and celebrations this week. Notably, today is Diwali, and we have our School Psychology Awareness Week. Mental health is one of our top priorities in the district, and supporting our students' social and emotional well-being. And we acknowledge the work of our psychologists this week. And then we've got American Education Week and Education Support Professionals Day. November is just chock full of appreciation. That brings us to item 2, which is the consent agenda. I'm going to, did you have something before that?
I just have a question. I see that we're doing Spanish translations at the bottom of our stream, which is fantastic. Are folks able to access that remotely as well, and do they have control, and are they able to choose language if they have a different language they need to choose?
Yeah, my understanding is there are several, and I will have the exact answer from Ms. Gasper.
In the live Teams function, we've got Chinese, Spanish, and Hindi that they can choose from on that.
Well, I just wanted to call it. I really appreciate it. It's streaming in here to let us know that that's happening, and just to let folks see it. I'm sure several people have already accessed it, but thank you for setting that up. And
we received
awesome.
a specific request, so it was great to make it happen.
And my understanding is if there's an additional language that is requested, we are able to accommodate that as well. Yeah. All right, so that brings us to item 2, the consent agenda. I move that we approve the consent agenda.
A second.
All right, are there any comments?
I have a quick comment just on the donations. I just wanted to call out that there are lots of ways that people can help us, and it's not always dollars. Sometimes it's time, and sometimes it's equipment. And this week an unusual donation was made. We had a saxophone donated, and I just think it's pretty awesome that our community comes through with all sorts of things we need. And if you see the donations for this week are everything for granting to our staff, to the band, to robotics, and there's just such a diversity of sharing going on in our community, and I appreciate it.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make the point about the superintendent's contract, because that came up for me just yesterday. Somebody was asking me, why you didn't have the big community engagement and everything. Well, this is just an interim contract, and the thing was, it would be now, and we are still recovering from COVID, and we don't have a lot of staff time and board bandwidth to do the whole big production, which I love to do and we will do. So what we're doing with this is we're getting enough time to do the real community engagement properly for our long-term superintendent going forward.
Thank you. And I can also kind of read a statement into the record that we discussed last week, and I may do that in a moment, but I want to see if anyone else has additional comments.
Sure, I'm happy to just build on what Carolyn said as well. I think this was discussed by the board essentially in the meetings of October 7th and 21st about how to ensure that our superintendent search balanced the need for a level of urgency with also a desire to be very thorough. And I think our board president and vice president started the RFP process and then came to realize that we wouldn't really be able to do it effectively this year and optimize for the community engagement that Director Watson, spoke about. And I think both she and Director Chu have been through the superintendent search process before and know kind of the importance of that community engagement. So I think This allows us actually to spend and index more time engaging the community, learning what is most important right now, especially post-COVID, and then looking well internally and then assessing external candidates, which is the right way to do this. So I think this was a really valuable and important decision. And once that RFP decision was made by the board on October 21st, I think this was the natural corollary from my standpoint.
Okay, anything else?
I will also just add that, you know, we discussed this a lot in numerous public meetings, and the record will probably show it was from the last meeting and that it was unanimous. But in addition to the points that Seema and Carolyn have made, this also creates stability, which was urgently and adamantly demanded by our community as we sort of pull our heads up for air and get back to the business of learning for our students this year. So that's the other factor in there.
And Director Chu.
Yeah, I will also add on, I just want to call out that we have just gone through as a board a whole series of listening sessions that will continue over time, but we've been through now a series of them. And one of the common things we heard is there's so much to worry about. There's so much, we want to recover, we want to re-engage, and we have to still deal with the realities of being in a pandemic. And we want to honor that. And that is important. And in that spirit, there are a few other things, though, that I also want to call out. We have 2 board directors who are departing this year, and we will be joined by 2 new board directors. And we very much want them to engage deeply with us in our community on the superintendent search for the long term, and trying to do that in the time frame we would have here while recovering, while dealing with COVID still, et cetera, et cetera. It really wasn't going to get us the highest quality community input service that we could get. And so community engagement is one of the most important elements to me, and the role of the board is making sure that we're engaging and making sure that the district's engaging. And so in that spirit, I would like to do this right. I also want to say we've done a superintendent search before, and a couple of them, and there are great practices with engagement, but I also think there are opportunities to add to that and build on it and do some different things this time. And the other thing I would like to call out is something that Director Weiss brought to our attention, and that is if we want time to evaluate internal candidates as well, we need time to do that. And that time is usually before you engage a national search. So if we want to engage a national search, we can do that next fall, and we now have the time to do that. We also have time throughout this spring to be evaluating internal candidates, and early next fall to be doing the same. And it just gives us a lot of time to get community input right, and to give the district some time to focus on recovery, re-engagement, and just all the authentic and meaningful things we need. And Dr. Jarvis is working hard to prioritize our kids and their needs. And I am confident that he will give us that stability. And I am excited at what this has brought us in terms of not just surviving, but really giving us an opportunity to really deeply engage our community, and to have this not just be a holding pattern time. 2 years with a superintendent gives time for things to happen, to really honor the things that our students and staff and families need, and to make progress. So that is why I was able to support the decision.
All right, excellent. Well, I think most of the points have been reiterated, and so I don't have to read the entire statement. But I just do want to say that we had identified a set of criteria previously. We set a really high bar, and then we more than met that in our initial hiring of Dr. Jarvis. He has decades of experience in education and as a superintendent. And when we talk about world-class superintendent, that's the term that we often use to describe that's what BSD deserves. Dr. Jarvis has been twice superintendent of the state of Washington. That's more than anyone else ever, and has demonstrated excellence in his past positions as well as already here in Bellevue. So he's indeed world class. He's brought much needed stability to our districts. He's still challenging us to grow. He understands how to direct energies where they're most needed, engage with students and families, support staff to meet the challenges that we face in this pandemic. And he's also a mentor's mentor. And he's providing on the ground real-time development of our already outstanding leadership team. So I think some of the other points that were made here about being able to really assess internal candidates and grow, people who really truly understand Bellevue and are able to just keep us moving forward instead of taking a pause to, get someone up to speed. That's another thing. So I just really wanted to emphasize that we are in very, very capable hands. We have the stability and will continue to benefit from the wisdom of a really renowned and seasoned superintendent. And that's really important for our entire district, of our students, our families, educators and staff all working together in this year. I'm going to pause for a second and then say my other comment about the consent agenda is that we do have our levy certification resolution, and I wanted to just point that out because as we go and ask for a renewal, right, replacing our levies, we always levy for an amount, and that amount is then partly dictated by what we're allowed to collect from the state. So right now we're allowed to collect less than the voters approved. And so that does mean that even as we go out for a levy and we ask for a certain amount, it doesn't mean that that tax rate stays the same for everyone. It can go down, but we have to have the most conservative estimate that's there. So we'd certainly like to collect more, but we are limited. And so part of our ongoing advocacy is with our state and representatives in trying to be able to provide as much as we can that our very generous community believes is what we should have in order to support the excellence that is our district. So I just wanted to point that one out as well, since it is very timely. Anything else?
We're just grateful to have a community that we have who has supported us through all these things, and we're really going to count on their continued support, because it is what it is one of the things that makes it possible to do what we're able to do for our students and families and with our staff. So we are grateful and hopeful.
Well, thank you, everyone. And so with that, I ask for a vote on the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, 5 ayes. The consent agenda is approved. That brings us to item 3, superintendent updates. Dr. Jarvis.
Thank you, Dr. Wiest, members of the board. First, I would again say thank you for the honor to be allowed to be with you another year. And it is exciting because we have a lot of work to do. I'll try to mention a couple of those things this evening, but I'd like to start with a couple of superintendent activities. Today I had the fun of visiting Kids Quest and meeting with the directors and also meeting with the Boys and Girls Club staff. And I'm beginning a round where I'm trying to meet as many of the community leaders as possible. Normally would have probably done that in September, but this year September and October were somewhat confined to how do we get things open. And it's really exciting to begin that process. I'm also scheduling, Yasmina is scheduling for me, visits with all 29 schools. And I should say 30 because I got a request from the virtual school that said, please don't forget us in those visits. So we'll be starting a round of visits to really talk about looking ahead, including things like the levy, but in particular looking ahead on what's in our vision and what are the kind of things that we're expecting. So it's an exciting opportunity for me. Less exciting was talking for a minute about the power outage, and I just wanted to explain a couple things. We lost power again this evening very briefly, or this afternoon at Newport area, and there's something going on underground and in that area that's causing us, I should say, particularly Melissa, a little heartburn as we try to make sure. But the twist that I wanted to make sure people understood is that in very much more normal times, we could withstand a couple hours of power outage and perhaps even the uncertainty of whether they'll go a third hour or a fourth hour. And the kids and the staff make it work wonderfully, and we've all seen that over the years. This year, we have a little issue of a pandemic and the filters of the HVAC systems and how much time we can go without the HVAC units running So it is influencing our decisions, and you're going to see perhaps more closures if we just have an indefinite time and we know that the HVAC systems aren't working. I would also add that when you have a single school closure, we can ask the state for a waiver of that day, and that's a lost day as a single school in the district or even a couple schools. If it's a district-wide closure, then we have a makeup day in mind, and we would, whether that's snow or ice or power, we have 3 dates built in, actually 4 dates built into our calendar on the 28th of January, the 18th of March, 22nd and 23rd of June, if necessary, to do makeups. I don't know yet, depending on what almanac you read, what we're going to expect, but the other thing I wanted to reiterate, and you've heard me say it once before, is that if we have a snow day requiring closure, we will close. We're not looking at converting at that time to a virtual and trying to figure out who has power and who doesn't, and which teachers can provide virtual and which teachers can't. So it is, I guess, one of the superintendent gifts that they sometimes make jokes about, of hoping the superintendent sees enough snow to close school and have a joyful day in the snow and the play, and whether you're staff or kids. So I'm not looking forward to closing for reason of snow, but if we do have to, we will close the district. We will not convert or pivot to a virtual day. We will keep it closed as a snow day. I wanted to give an update on vaccine. I think probably everybody who's listened to the news in the last 24 hours is aware that the vaccine is now approved for ages 5 through 11. And I want to thank our staff again for, they've been anticipating this one, but on the the 5th and 6th, we are having a clinic in the district, and in that clinic allows us to do, I think, 700 on one day and 1,200 on another day. We're up to 1,900 students. We partnered with Safeway in terms of the vaccines and the children's vaccine. There is a backup set of dates on the 12th and 13th if for some reason that was required. There's also a schedule for a second dose that would take place on the 3rd and 4th of December for those young people that are vaccinated. So according to the news this morning, some parents have discovered in their various locations that every single appointment in the month of November is already filled for their children. So I would certainly like the community to be aware that the Bellevue School District staff, I think, has done a fantastic job on this and preparing and being ready and taking as many slots as we can. So if you have a chance, please follow through, and there are people here tonight that could assist with knowing what the process is and what's ahead. But I think it's a terrific opportunity for us. We had tremendous vaccination from the eligible students at age 12 through 19. So we're anticipating a very, very busy request for ages 5 through 11. Wanted to give a kudo, something the board had been very interested in and inquired before about arranging a date during the week for SAT exams, and we've just finished that. The number that I saw was 1,663 students that took the SAT in Bellevue on that Thursday, and I think that's just a marvelous opportunity for the young people. Their scores will come back in early December. But to be able to do that and do that on Thursday, and knowing that that had been a priority of the board, I compliment you, and we were able to deliver that and move ahead, and I think it's there. There weren't anywhere near as many. There were about 15 students that took the ASVAB, which is the military exam, and that took about 22 staff members at the district level to work with each of those students basically one-on-one and come up with a testing place and an opportunity. And again, that was done in grand style, and my compliments to them. I certainly, as a superintendent, welcome our two new board members, Joy Shui and Jane Aris. Are the two members that will have been elected by the community and will be seated. It will save December for opportunities to talk about others who may be leaving us, but I welcome those new board members, and I have reached out to them to offer the onboarding and opportunities to bring them up to speed on issues and time and whatever questions they may have. So one of whom is just walking in the door, and I say congratulations. A quick update without giving a lot of details is the SRO, and there have been questions about where are we on the SROs. For all practical purposes, a committee last spring and before I got here had looked at the SRO question and looked at two basic alternatives. Do we look at the SRO program and amend it, or do we do something different than the SRO program and using police officers in the school district? We are working with the Bellevue Police Department, and the process has been underway, and Mr. James and Mr. Harrison have been working with the officers, developing the details in concert with what the committee issues, the committee and the new legislation asks for. And I don't have a report yet that says these are the details, but it's emerging with a partnership, and it's emerging in a way that will serve the entire school district, all 29 schools, and try to make sure that some of the areas that needed adjustment or more regulation have been taken care of. Lastly, as it's been, as many people here tonight and others know, it's been a lot of conversation about Puesta del Sol and our suggestion that school, as it emerges into a new building, would adjust the model. And in just a minute, I'm going to ask Eva Collins to offer the update on that, because I think it'll be an update most people appreciate in terms of taking more time to look at all the elements and the request. The part I wanted to comment on very quickly is I was a little surprised people don't know me as the new person, the new superintendent. So I heard one of the concerns that whether or not I, as a superintendent and the board, were looking at closing down all the choice schools and decreasing the choice opportunities. And if it hadn't been painful just in the sense of what we were working on Puesta and trying to make that right, I probably would have chuckled a little bit, because anybody that would ever check on me knows that a couple of my favorite things in the world are to look at how do we personalize the education world out of the old school, everybody gets the same whether you need it or not, to a world that says we can adjust the system to meet families and needs very differently. And one of the ways we do that is through choices and options and creating programs that enhance that. A second thing that I'll just commit to and share with people is that one of my very favorite models is immersion, and another favorite model is dual language. So it's not one where I look as a superintendent down my nose at those. They've been wonderful options, and we intend to keep them alive. But in terms of some specifics now for the question on what were we trying to do with Puesta and where are we heading and how fast are we doing that, I'd like to invite Eva Collins as our deputy superintendent, who has the entire domain of instruction and curriculum, including things like the Puesta del Sol, and ask her to give an update of where we are as a system. And Eva, would you please update people?
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. And the green light's on, but I can't tell if
I
you're
think
hearing me okay? You're
Can I
hearing me
have
okay? Great,
Get
thank you.
even closer, I'll bring you this microphone.
Yeah, this is fine. And I wrote down some notes so I can follow my own train of thought, especially given the mixed messages and lack of communication, I think, and clear communication that brought us to the point that we're at today. But I want to begin with by sharing that the board was not involved or even really fully informed of the concerns or of the decisions that were being made or the direction. And so any concerns should be directed at me and my leadership team, not at the board. However, having said that, our board is always interested in wanting to know what's working and not working in the district. And I think this is a great example of engagement or lack of engagement that leads us in a direction that we don't want to go. And so I think the board is deeply committed to community engagement, and so it's no fault of the board that we are where we are right now. I just wanted to start with that because I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding and belief that the board maybe directed this district direction, and that isn't the case. Okay, so I do have a few notes that I want to share, and especially in light of the past few weeks. So over the past few weeks, our leadership team has been going out to meet with each dual language school staff and the Ptsa del Sol staff. And from those meetings, we do agree that we need to take more time while we engage staff and families, and especially considering the implications on the dual language and immersion programs. I think that's what the community has been requesting, and rightfully so. We need to do that, and we will do that. There have been several meetings with staff and parents this week, and more will be scheduled in the future. And there are diverse perspectives emerging from stakeholders. So our stakeholders aren't speaking with one single voice. There's many perspectives. And I wanted to share a few important considerations. All of our schools, we would want to be accessible to all students. I think we all would agree about that. And the richness of diversity is increasing in Bellevue as well as at Ptsa del Sol. And our multilingual learners bring a wealth of language and culture to the classroom. I don't think any of us would dispute those things. There's also a benefit of explicit English literacy instruction for all students. And we also understand that we have not engaged the staff and families sufficiently to understand even why we were proposing what was being proposed at the time. And so as we begin to develop global competency, it's something we've been talking about in our district as far as developing our students as creators of their future world. Bilingual education for all students is an aspect we want to further explore. So I just wanted to share those things because there is a value and a commitment to bilingual education, and I don't think that has come across in our recent communication. So some next steps that we're taking is there is a plan that would include outreach to Ptsa del Sol educators through their leadership team, engaging with the leadership team and then the entire staff, and reaching out to the Ptsa and determining how best to engage families. Also continuing to engage our Spanish-speaking families. Last night there was an event held for Spanish-speaking families across the district. 50% of the families that participated have students in a dual language program or Ptsa del Sol, and 50% did not. And there was very high interest in participating in such a program at the meeting last night. We have met with the dual language immersion ILT to discuss programs and K-12 articulation. That team is representative of all levels, K-12. And that group made a decision to form a committee. And so they will be discussing in this upcoming week or so the makeup of that committee to begin to have these conversations about engagement and about ideas on how best to serve kids. I also wanted to say that the dual language program, for those who aren't that familiar with the program, it started as a grassroots effort at 3 of our elementary schools. It started initially at Sherwood Forest, and then the next year it started at 2 additional elementary schools. Today, I had the privilege of visiting classes at Sherwood Forest, including a dual language classroom where I observed students learning the new math curriculum. And I have to tell you, it was truly inspiring to see our students engaged while also developing the Spanish language and fluency. And over the years, I've had the privilege of observing in many classrooms at Puesta del Sol. In fact, my nephews were students at Puesta del Sol and, you know, went through the program all the way through Newport years ago. And I have the utmost respect and admiration for both the dual language and immersion staff. And I really regret that events of the past few weeks have resulted in our staff at those schools and families feeling devalued. I really regret that, and I very much apologize for that. We're committed to repair and do better. I think we all have the best interest of students at the center, and that's a great place to start. So thank you.
That would conclude my report to the board, and I would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. Thank you for covering the number of topics. Are there questions or comments from directors? Director Chu?
I have one that's going to kind of jump topics. So if somebody wanted to deal with the last topic directly. Okay. So I recently, as part of the committee work that I do with the students instruction and family engagement work, had the pleasure to work with one of our experts, Chitra, on our MLL policy. And one of the things that happened in that policy work was something I wanted to call out as a celebration. It's one of the places in which the critical criteria was used more upfront, not perfectly upfront, but more upfront to guide the process and to really engage stakeholders. There was a group put together that included it did include staff and families and district staff and classroom staff, and to inform the process of a better MLL policy that would meet needs. And that was really exciting for me because we've been working on the critical criteria process. I think for Carolyn, has it been 3 years or something, trying to get that process right? And yeah, and I think it's not about going through the motions. It's not about the check boxes. It's like we've redesigned it, and the third redesign that we did with our stakeholders was included a piece that asks us to proactively identify not only the risks to different groups of people from any policy, program, or anything that we are going to engage in or invest in. It asks us how we're going to involve our stakeholders, not only in dealing with the aftermath, but in planning so that we can address things. And it was a very effective thing, I think, that we just did. What I'd like to ask the superintendent is to comment a little bit more about what we can do to ensure that that type of engagement with our stakeholders is the norm when we are making program modifications, when we are making annual plans, when we don't want it to be a checkbox. It was never supposed to be a checklist. It was supposed to be a deep, genuine way of planning, engaging, iterating, monitoring, and fixing so that we disrupt inequities in the system. So can you tell more about how we can see that happen more consistently now that we have this better process in place? And also just many, many thanks to the MLL department for the work that was done there.
Thank you, Dr. Chu. I think my best answer to that is that in a way, this became the first of our, call it our more normal business as we opened the schools, where kids were back 5 days a week. We've been spending a lot of time on the management side and the logistics. And this one with a knowledge that the new school, the new building was emerging. And I guess an impression, I'm going to certainly own my part, that this was a project, a change that had been under discussion for quite some time as the success of the program had emerged, more and more students who were native speakers and trying to add the English component. So I think in essence, I'll just own my own, that I did not realize that we simply had missed that step, and any discussions that were in the past, and they were lost in the pandemic, and they did not, excuse me, I'll try to speak into the microphone, that they did not translate to engagement of the public the way we would do that under critical criteria. So in answer to your question, how do we guarantee, how do we make sure that that happens in the future? It's sadly that we did this first. We learned the results of not having taken some of the steps that we needed to, and they were critical, and they were very important to our community and our parents. So I'm going to use that as the evidence that is there, and it will happen, and we're going to have to, when we present you with a proposal, that proposal will describe and discuss the ways that we've met the critical criteria for consideration of that recommended change. So it will come to you with that knowledge.
I totally appreciate that, but I just want to call out that the MLL policy that I'm talking about is different than this work. And it really is a genuine celebration of the critical criteria execution. And I appreciate that you calling out that this is an example, this the Ptsa program evolution is an example of where we didn't do it and that we're going to do it again there. What I was more looking for is just like, is there anything that the board can do to help ensure that we are consistently applying the critical criteria whenever there's a programming change or any of these planning pieces? And
in all honesty, I would say no. You have some very strong policies and your expectations as a board and the plan. So it falls under my shoulders on the half of being your one employee that's supposed to carry out the policy. And with that strong policy, the staff obviously is the way we get our work done. But it really falls back on all of us to have that consistent look at it and say, have we done A, B, C, and D? And if not, we've got more work to do before we can proceed. So I don't believe there's anything the board has to do to say, darn it, this is important. You really put it in policy, and it's expected.
I had a lot of strong feelings about this whole event because, Christine and I, and a whole committee of sort of the Equity Advisory Committee and a whole bunch of people worked on this, putting these critical criteria in place to make sure that stakeholders weren't forgotten and that we didn't forget about the impact this would have on various families and kids. And it just so saddened me because I felt like it only took me like a couple of conversations to come up with 6-7 things that were overlooked, that were concerns from families at Ptsa del Sol. And then I had some conversations with dual language, and there's another couple of concerns, but it's harder for me to talk directly to those families, but I think that we should, not maybe, you said you had an event, but I would really want to talk to each one and say, is this good for you? Or, what are your issues going to be? And how are we going to do, for me, transportation is equity. And I know when you're at a choice school, you gotta, we say we provide a bus, but you got to drive, if your kid's going to do all the activities and stuff. So all of these things had to be thought through. And it just so saddens me that we had this difficult moment in our community. And I guess I am afraid that it'll happen again because we'll forget. Like Christine was pointing out, I don't know. How do we know we won't forget?
So if I may, I'll say that I appreciate that Dr. Jarvis has answered the question and is committed to the accountability. Additionally, we are having a session on communications, and part of this falls under communications. So considering where we are on time, I'm going to ask if there's any kind of new questions or topics for this area. And then we are within our total time. There is an error at the very end of our total time. It shouldn't say 8:10, it should say 7:40, but we are within our time. So I'm not going to extend. We're just going to be kind of a little bit behind, but we should fall within the whole 3.5 hours. I'm also saying that for those who are in the room who are patiently waiting for public comment, it may be pushed out, but we are addressing, many important issues, and at times that does put us further along in the agenda than we anticipate. So are there any new topics or that were brought up in the superintendent report? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for the report. And that will bring us to the next item on the agenda, which is committee work. So directors, we have a lot under committee work and we have 30 minutes allocated for this time. I don't think we'll be making up the time in this section, but I just want to be mindful of that. My understanding is under item 4.1, that's really for information in terms of information that was collected so that GoalCom can work on policy and procedures 1240. So that is not something for discussion right now. However, if there is an update from the legislative advocacy in terms of what happened at the WASDA convention, would you like to give a brief update?
I think we should. Seema, do you want me to do it, or do you have some thoughts?
You're welcome to start. I mean, we can just tell you that we attended together. I think Christine attended the first day where I think there was maybe more, I would say, pointed and exciting things happening. And I think Christine is the right one to give that update. I'm happy to give a little bit from the second day, but I'm happy to have you cover all of it.
No. Let's split that. So we'll be quick because we don't have a lot of time, but we want you to know that the most of the resolutions that we either contributed to or proposed, the positions that we proposed passed with one exception. So we got our testing, reform for testing to take less time from our kids' daily stuff. We got the work for the state to look at online learning differently so that they're not paying us 75% of what they normally do with no adjustment for cost of living. And we got the position in that the state needs to cover the costs of things like pandemics and other extreme emergencies, and that there shouldn't be mid-year adjustments to the budget. Like when we're already committed on our budget, the state shouldn't be adjusting our requirements or our dollars allocated. We'll be working on things for holding harmless, and we do need to bring you either at our next meeting or the first in December, our legislative platform. So we're a little behind on that. And then the one that we did not get through is our comprehensive safety one. Unfortunately, that suffered the hands of bureaucracy is what it did. Somebody decided that they would get to the essence of things and really distill it down. But unfortunately, their distillation took out some of the elements about social emotional supports for safety, and it removed some things about gun safety. Fortunately, there were other positions that put some of those things back in. So in the end, there is a position on comprehensive school and student safety that still stands. So that's good. And there are positions that do address social emotional learning and safety. And Seema, you've got kind of the more economic side instead of student side of things, and the board director governance side from day 2, I guess. So anything you want to add?
I think that the key ones were just, there was an emergency proposal to support an immunization process, which I think, having watched directors Weist and Chu slog through last year with sort of just the myriad of rules, regulations, and having it be up to districts to try to navigate, I think that was a rather welcome convergence on a good proposal. There was also one about seemingly benign, but actually quite valuable kind of participation in local voter pamphlets, ensuring that, frankly, various positions could find their way in a voter pamphlet. So when something like our levy comes up, people could really appreciate more broadly the impact. There's also one on student voice and governance, and there was a very interesting one regarding attracting, recruiting, and retaining diverse school board directors. At the end of the day, I think that one in particular has good intent. I think there's some legal issues and some other things that may not make it translate into legislation, but I think overall it was a pretty positive legislative assembly, and it was nice to partner with Dr. Chu. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Only other thing is not directly related to GoalCom, but still in the advocacy realm. Francine and I and Dr. Jarvis will meet with 4 other school districts and our state superintendent, Reichdahl, on Friday morning. And then that meeting will be followed by a meeting with our county partners in public health and council. So we will be dealing there. One of the things we'll probably tackle in both of those meetings is funding, but particularly in the second one, looking for funds for all the contact tracing and other public health work that our school districts are taking on and aren't being done by other places. So we'll keep you posted if there's any opportunity to do more advocacy, but we want to broach those issues with these coordinating state organizations.
That brings us to item 4.2. You've already basically introduced policy 2110. Is there anything to add briefly?
2110? No, I think Christine covered it nicely in the superintendent update.
Yeah, the bottom line of this policy is that it was a very, very narrow policy, and we wanted it to apply more broadly to all of our multilingual learners. And not just a subset or, a subset in time or anything. And so the staff went through and really deeply looked into each part and tried to update the policy to address, to make sure it's more representative. So we can take specific questions. I don't know if John or Sharon want to help us out here.
Yeah, I'll just say this policy, this is a first reading, but it could technically be considered a second reading because what happened is we brought it to the board like more than a year ago and said, this is what we're thinking of. Basically, this only applies, it was called the Transitional Bilingual Instructional Program. And it was about that specific, program that is federally funded and required to have a policy about it. But there was no broader multilingual learner program or policy. And so we revamped, or rather Ptsa revamped this policy to better reflect our sort of like overall policy around multilingual learning.
And probably my favorite element of the whole thing, I'm sure there are lots of worthy things, but it is that it is a strengths-based policy. It is looking at learners from their strengths and not their deficit in English or their deficit anywhere else, but it really centers on understanding and developing and accessing their strengths, their content knowledge, their content capacities.
Okay. So I have an issue with this policy that may surprise Christine and Erica because it's not to do with the content of the policy. But my concern is that in this whole disruption around the Ptsa program, one of our administrators pointed to the fact that this was going to be on the agenda tonight as a reason, a justification that the decision around what was going to happen with immersion and dual language had to be decided by, had to be rushed. This is, I can name names, but I'm not going to name names right here. And that concerns me a lot. And with the community asking, could we please delay? Let's make sure this is a first reading and go back through this policy and look at it with the eyes on it saying, how does this have any effect on what people are going to use this policy to do something around dual language and immersion? We just need to look at it again with that framework.
Thanks, Carolyn. That's great feedback. Please know that this policy was started months and months and months ago. It had absolutely, well, I don't want to say it had nothing to do. It's policy that is overarching and does apply to our dual language and immersion programming.
Yeah.
But our policies should not be used or designed, and we'll take your advice to go back and take another look at it, to do things to the detriment of any student. Right. They're all designed to address the needs of the students that they have. And sometimes there are needs that we haven't been addressing that we do need to shine a light on and address. So that may be the case in this particular case. I don't know all the details because, as Eva said, this wasn't a board decision, it was an operational programming decision. But I do think like there may be needs that weren't being addressed, and those still do need to be addressed, and we wouldn't want to change the policy to not address needs. So, and I
Right.
don't think you were implying that.
No,
So
I'm
is there
saying
anything
let's do
particular?
right by
But did
all
you
the
see
kids.
anything particular in it that you were
No.
worried about, or is it more just the
It's more
timing
the
and you want us to
general.
do?
I tried really studying it, and I just thought, there are certain areas where you could maybe twist the words or something. I don't know. So I just want to be sure about it. But I do want to say I really want to do right by all the kids, and particularly, dual language kids, because I feel like they have been underserved, but I want to make sure we get it right.
All right, so we'll take this as the first reading. I have one clarifying question and one request. Are there other directors have anything else before I proceed? All right, so my clarifying question is, as Director Malif noted previously, when this was brought forward, it was because it was very narrowly defined as just the transitional bilingual instruction, and that's narrowly defined and how the policy is was construed, and I think that the model policy is similar to this. So I applaud that we're taking it in a direction that really makes sense for our district, and I think could serve as a model for others. But in that, because there was specific federal, I believe it's federal interpretation, language support funding around transitional bilingualism, is that still fully reflected in this policy? There's only one line about that now.
I'm gonna look out. Sharon, do you have an answer on that one? Francine, could you ask your question again so she can hear you? Because I don't have the answer.
So that's what this policy has not really changed what the federal the requirements are. So when we look at the last policy, the requirements for really reporting those have been kept for the compliance, for the policy, for the federal. And that's why the very first line, the district will provide a transitional bilingual instruction program for children whose primary language is not English and who qualify for English language learner services. That has been kept for as intended. What we have really changed is, as the state is also changing, we are bringing new VIDA model for our multilingual learners. So even at the state level, we are shifting the way we look at our multilingual learners. So this policy is reflecting the shift and the change that we are bringing with the new standards that we are adopting. So that's what this policy is reflecting about our new VIDA principles and the new VIDA standards that as a state we are adopting. So I think this policy keeps the federal requirement as well as it elevates the way the state is going and where we are going.
Okay, so to clarify, for example, in new item D, where it says annually assessed by means of the state-approved test improvement in English language proficiency for each eligible English language learner. I think that was original text. It's just been re-lettered. However, originally it did say to ensure that there is testing in English. So that covers it because we're talking about the state assessed test. And if that changes, even though it's state, here it says state and it's federal funding, we're covered.
That's correct.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. My request is, since we're taking another look at the policy, just generally across all of our policies, I believe we are making an effort in inclusion, not to just say parents. So I noticed it said parents/guardians.
This one? Sorry.
It does say parents/guardians. However, whether that is really sufficient in terms of our communications. So certainly we have caregivers who are neither the parents or guardians. They could be siblings, grandparents, sometimes family friends, depending on the situation of the student. And so whether some things that are mandated a certain way, but other areas where we have really the agency to be more inclusive, to look at our language that way. So I would think that the intent in our communications would carry that, but I'd like to see that reflected in our policies as well.
Thank you. That's a great feedback.
Okay, is there anything else? All right. The other item that's under the SIFE is our summaries from the listening sessions. We had considered having a fuller discussion of that. I would propose that this is available for consumption and at a future time, and perhaps it is when the new board members are present, that there could be a rich discussion and sharing of what's happened in the listening sessions. And I'll work on working that into a future agenda. Is there any objection to that?
I will just like to throw out there, since I won't be here for any future sessions. I won't go into detail. I mostly participated in the family sessions, and I will say there were a lot of different themes. They're here, you can read them, but there were two that really came up everywhere. One was, everyone is so happy to be back in school, like so happy. The other one was recovery services, people don't know what's going on. That came up in every session from multiple people in every session. And you know, we've been in school for 2 months and they don't know what's happening with their recovery services. So I will just put those pieces out there for everyone to hear, and that's all. That's sort of like the big highest level things I want to share from those sessions.
Thank you. All right, so we will make sure to build in time so there can be kind of richer discussion and reflection, and then planning for the future listening sessions, because it will almost be time to start planning those as well. And so being able to reflect and determine how those might be structured could be part of the discussion.
Note that there are a few more that are kind of trickling through, that that several of the affinity groups haven't yet been scheduled, so we're still working on those. So.
Excellent. Okay, so that'll bring us to item 4.3, which is FinOps. We have 2 policies. Director Watson, do you want to take us through briefly?
Well,
we have a second reading.
Like here we are again. We've done this one a couple of times, and last time we kind of got I want to say stalled out over some of the wording, which wasn't necessarily completely substantial, and staff took a stab at fixing that, and Francine, being our resident MD, analyzed the wording on that to see that if it would be all right. And basically the issue was who has to sign off? Do you a licensed physician or nurse practitioner, or is it your favorite herbalist? It's I think you concluded it seems like it'll work.
Well, actually, I don't take credit, and we have staff that reviewed that. So,
and then the other issue was the reason we removed the military caregiver things is that the state law changed, and according to the WASDA guidance, it's not different from family medical leave.
Or more specifically, it's covered in the labor agreements.
Okay, so basically my thinking from the last couple of readings of this was that we were hung up on the word around the medical person who would be writing the note. And if it's okay with everyone, I think we can pass it.
Could you clarify, because I didn't think it was about who was writing the note, it was whether or not women were getting permission for some of these activities. I thought it was a more substantive issue.
But some of that we have to do from an HR perspective.
So could you kind of circle back with us on what you learned, what the committee learned, so the rest of us can kind of come up to speed on that?
If I can.
So there's two main areas. Yes. So on page 3.
I'm trying to remember, because we got legal guidance on that for a long time. It's been a long time.
Right. So on page 3, where there's the section in green, there's healthcare provider, and there's the initial verification, and then there can be a secondary verification. And that actually apparently also applies to the section below, which is similar on when it involves a pregnancy. And then I'll just note that there were two, we reread it, and there's two minor grammatical things that we'll take as, won't put as a formal amendments, but we will correct in there. I think there's one word that says within, and it should say with, and then there's another section where in the inclusive language, I think one of the pronouns was changed and one was not crossed out. So we just need to make sure in the final clean copy that that's taken care of. All right, anything else? All right, seeing no further, I see people just looking at their screens, so I'm giving you a moment. But if not, I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the policy? Oh,
We have
sorry.
to move it. Well, I'll
Thank you.
move that we approve this policy.
All right, I'll second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. The policy passed as written there with we'll make the minor grammatical changes. And so that brings us to the next policy that I'm already going to move that we consider. Oh, actually, we don't need to. It's first reading. Sorry, first reading for 6230. Director Watson, do you want to take us through it? No? All right, I will. Okay, it's relations with vendors. This is a WASDA recommended change. You can see in the memo. Basically, the proposed revisions will require the district to include in any contract the provisions that are listed there. So it was above a administrative change, so required coming to the board. However, the substance of it is not much beyond what you see there. It's pretty straightforward.
The question I had when I was looking this over was, when does this come up for us? And apparently, because I know.
Mike.
Sorry. My question around this was, when does this come up for us? And apparently it comes up a lot in the world of ASB, where they like to contract with different fundraising opportunities.
Okay, so are there any comments or questions, anything you'd like us to look at further? If not, we'll bring this back for a second reading. It'll just come up in the next meeting so that it's established and effective for policy. Then that brings us to item 4.4, which is executive committee. So we spent extensive time, over 3 hours, in the board workshop working on this policy. Really grateful to everyone's time, directors and staff, for working on this, and really beyond updating the policy, really having an opportunity to discuss what's important, what's needed, so that as we're really striving for these outcomes, improving, having solid outcomes for students, and being able to support everyone in our system that supports students, how we monitor and report on those. And so I think that discussion has been useful and then is hopefully reflected in this policy. So without really going into it, since we spent a lot of time on it, are there further, is there any further discussion?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but this just came to mind because of what we just went over earlier in the meeting. But when under the paragraph that says commitment to equity and accountability, it seems like a simple change where we cross out the superintendent will review the district commitments to equity and accountability and ensure that the annual and strategic plans advance those commitments. And the suggestion is to strike review the district's commitments and just the superintendent will ensure the annual and strategic plans advance those commitments to equity and accountability. And I actually think we kind of need to keep that phrase, reviews the commitments to equity, because if you go and review the commitments to equity, they're not just sort of like, oh, we commit to equity. They are very specific. There are commitments around curriculum, access to resources and programs, interventions to remove barriers, discipline without disproportionality, professional development for staff, hiring, using the critical criteria on all curriculum, procedures, budgets, and program-specific plans, which is what came up for us, reporting on racial tension and partnership with diverse groups. So they are very specific list of commitments that some future superintendent looking at this might say, oh yeah, I'm looking at it with an equity lens, and not realize that there are actual things you need to go through one by one. So that's why I would like to leave the phrase, you need to go review the commitments to equity that are in the equity policy and make sure you've hit all of those.
Is there further comment on that? Is there a sense that the previous language was stronger? It seemed to me that we went from reviews to ensure. So
yeah, but you had to go, this calls on you, and perhaps you could even add, you know, in the equity policy, calls on you to go find out what those commitments were before you say, okay, yeah, I got it.
Why don't you review and ensure?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Maybe you take both and merge them.
Yeah, just put that phrase back in.
My question about this particular section is whether or not it's fully in compliance with the equity and accountability policy. So one of the things that we agreed to in that policy is that, and in the procedure as well, is that there would be an annual establishment of measures, target measures for each of the commitments. And now we understand that we may not be able to make huge substantive progress on how many, we're at 9 or 10, I believe, district commitments. So we might not to make a huge investment in every one every year, but I think the purpose of that was to make sure that those things we are investing in, we know if we're succeeding at, so that there's a clear target. And secondly, that those things that we're trying to maintain are actually maintained and that we don't lose ground. For example, you know, we've made some advances. We've actually made some improvements in our discipline being out of, you know, less disproportionate. And I think that's really important. And if we just stop paying attention to it and have no target to check it each year, then it's my concern that we will lose it. And so that is by policy already implemented in another policy. The way this is written, it kind of implies that we can just make sure that we're making some progress. Like there's a very specific requirement to have a measurable target or a way of assessing our progress on each of those commitments each year. And this doesn't do that. And the reason that I'm kind of stuck on it is that I looked at our annual plan this year and it maps itself to the equity and accountability commitments, but it only maps to half of them. Half of them are not mentioned or mapped to. And so I don't know how we're going to know at the end of the year if we've slid in those areas. So that's something that I don't know how that's covered here. And I want to see greater specificity or greater accountability to the equity and accountability policy there.
So are there any further, so I've heard one specific amendment to reinsert the word review.
Review.
With all the details.
You want the entire?
The entire phrase.
Okay, so Director Watson moves that we reinsert review the district commitment to equity and accountability. And I think I heard
that
a
phrase,
second.
that whole phrase.
I will second.
Okay. Any further discussion?
So is the only feedback that we can give here is to make a motion and then we vote to see whether or not other people agree, or are we actually able to just discuss like whether or not this is accomplishing what we want it to accomplish? I'm not sure where you're going because I just gave a concern that I don't think is represented here. And you said you didn't hear anything except Carolyn's amendment. So what else, what did you want me to do to put on the table for that?
So to put forward a specific amendment. So I heard your concern, but then I didn't hear how we were going to do that. So I took the one that we have and we're going to vote on that one. And then if there's another amendment, we can do that as well. So I was giving you some time to think about it as we're out of time. But we can either extend time or we can, there's a couple of different ways we're going to handle it. So while you think about how we might weave that in specifically, if you'd like to see it, is there any further discussion on the amendment? All right, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
The amendment passes.
I guess to the point Christine raised, I think what I'm not clear on is, was this something that, we went through an exercise in our study session where we sort of put up language and then we essentially each kind of voted on it. So I'm not clear if this was something that you had kind of put up on the board and we've already sort of considered it. Like was this one of the pieces of language that you had proposed?
I don't think that I proposed it in language per se. What I was told during that evening was that we could make small amendments only to the policy, and then vote on those, and then there'd be some modifications made. But the opportunity for discussion would be tonight. So just like we went through the MLL policy just now, and we got some general comments about like concerns about whether or not it would stand up to a particular lens or not. We were asked to re-review the policy through 2 different lenses. And so we will go back and do that, and that's fine. But there was no opportunity for concerted discussion among the board directors at the workshop that we had. It was all a write your own modifications down, vote, and then move on. So this was, I thought, an opportunity for us to talk about whether or not this was going to take care of the equity issues that we've committed to.
All right, so I hear the point that you've raised. I've also seen, and we've discussed in some other contexts, when we were looking at the annual plan, some of the challenges around the way some of the policies were written with regards to the goals, and then the district being able to execute on it, as well as some choices that were made this year in particular around our recovery period. So for example, we didn't even have something related to one of our main strategic plan goals, goal 3. So I think since, as you mentioned, there is language in the equity and accountability policy, and I heard Dr. Jarvis very clearly say that it is his responsibility then to ensure that his staff carry out the policies and the procedures, and this would be one of them, that accountability is in place. And so together, the 2 policies work together, especially now with the amendment that just passed.
Well, then let me ask our board, because I'd like to understand how people are thinking about it from a governance perspective. We have an annual plan that does not comply with policy 0130, our equity and accountability policy. It maps to half of our commitments and not the other half in our equity and accountability work. It doesn't have a measure for each one so that we'll know that we're on track this year. So what is our view of governance in terms of accepting that or asking for something more, or how is it that we will uphold that policy?
So while you're thinking of that question, we can extend time for about 5 minutes to take this and then decide whether we're going to take a vote or whether this policy is going to not take a vote today. Is there any objections
No.
to extending? Okay, I'm just going to extend it for 5 minutes, but then we will need to move on. Go ahead, Director Watson.
Well, I'm wondering if this, am I missing in something in here? Is this the be all and end all of all reporting? Because down at the bottom it says something about we could ask for additional reports of the superintendent, and in 0130 we have asked for an additional report, haven't we?
0130 specifies that it be included in the annual plan.
Right. That where they would specifically go through those 8 or however many things I read out just now and say, we got this one and we did this one and oh, we forgot that one, however you would do a report. Can that be one of the reports that we request?
Yes, so it can be both an additional report can be requested. So when I reviewed this, I had some thoughts around it and I thought, but future boards have that option with the additional things that can be requested. To Director Chu's point, yes, in governance, this board made a decision in consultation and with the recommendation of staff around the annual plan that was approved. And yes, that may not have been completely in sync with that previous policy. So there are a couple of options. One, that is the purview of the board to make that decision and approve the annual plan as such. That's one. Two, that may prompt that there's potential to review the equity and accountability policy that was written a few years ago. And perhaps it's time to really update that and take into account, again, even though there was a very large stakeholder effort made to look at that policy in the spirit of equity and accountability, reviewing a critical policy like that one and ensuring that it continues to reflect the values and intent would be important. So one possibility is to try to weave it into here. However, since you point out that there are already some internal consistencies, I would be wary of trying to do that in this policy at this time, rather than going back and kind of analyzing the sort of root cause of where the inconsistency is occurring. So I would be ready to take a vote on this policy tonight as is.
Yeah, I would just say that I think what I see is 0130 stands on its own, and it has, what I hear from you is, I don't see an annual plan that is meeting the expectation that you have for compliance with 0130. I don't believe that we need to, in my mind, diminish 0130 by saying it gets its authority by weaving it into 0150. I think the fact that we took the time and made the effort to have a policy that's on its own demands and accounts for that level of accountability back on equity is a positive thing. So I don't feel the need to infuse it or mention it somewhere else for it to have that authority. So that's where I just, I don't think we need to bootstrap it, is I guess my point. So I feel like 0150 as drafted reflects a combination of staff input, which was that the policy we had was too long and was actually breaking the district in negative ways, but it's got balanced with the input that we all had through our study session. So I am comfortable going forward in light of Carolyn's amendment with a vote.
So I would just like to respond to those items and we can proceed as needed. The 0130 issue came up in that staff asked for it to be integrated into the annual plan because it was too much to have too many significant reports. And also, if you're really going to do equity right, it has to be part of the core work of what you're doing. And so I think it is interesting because I think there's also a set of core things that the district needs to do that shouldn't necessarily be part of our goals, which you could argue like some of the academic achievement. That's not a strategic investment every year. We have a lot of good academic programs, but we do still need to track where our kids are at and whether they're achieving and so forth. So it could be that some of the equity pieces are measured in that way. And I'm not sure that this captures quite either of those pieces. I also think that there's some conflating in this new policy between the concept of a plan and the concept of a report. A plan is where we state up front what we're going to measure, what we're going to watch for, what we're going to what our goals are, what our objectives and targets are, and then our reports are telling us how we're doing with progress to those. So I see a lot of places in this where there's a lot of conflating between those two pieces, and there's a lot of loose language that makes it hard for me to understand. So in addition to the issues with the reporting of the equity and accountability commitments, when I see things like the approved annual plan, so it implies that the board's going to approve it, but it doesn't really clarify that it's approved And then on top of that, there are places where it says, well, the superintendent will let the board know if they need to change it. So we can approve a plan, but the way that this is written, it could get changed with no approval and just be a different plan by the end. And so I appreciate the need to update this policy. I understand that it was being interpreted in ways that made it hard for people to apply it. I actually have huge faith that our superintendent here would have done fine executing anyway, but you know, if we wanted to take some of those barriers out of the way, which is one of the things we've all committed to doing, is removing barriers when they get in our system's way, that's fine. I still maintain that there are a few questions here that I don't have good answers to, and in that workshop, I didn't find that workshop to be a place where I got to deeply understand much of anything from other people's perspectives and to really know how things worked. So that is what I had hoped for tonight. It sounds like we are moving in a different direction, but I just wanted to put that out there as to where I was hoping to go.
I'm wondering whether this could actually be a first reading, so to speak, and maybe we could have. I'm not quite following all the changes that Christine is pointing to, but you know, maybe you could give us a few wording tweaks. We don't want, I think we all agree, we don't want this policy to go back to being miles long. But if there's like a few little things that would clarify some of those things, maybe we could consider them at a future meeting under this policy. If we did if this was like a second first reading, so to speak.
Or one idea is if you were to like share how you would fix it, we could also ask, you know, staff to consider how they would take what you said with a little bit more of a specific proposal. And then we could get something that maybe also is workable from a staff point of view, and then we could take it from there. So it's not.
So is there
only,
is there consensus then to do this as we'll do another reading at the next meeting? Yes? I see 1, 2, 3. All right. So we can. Yes.
Yeah,
I'm going to make proposals. We don't want me to drive the changes independently, right? So how do I get those? I had hoped to have conversation about them and not just direct exactly what this should say and understand where people were thinking about governance wise. So I got some of that on the equity piece. I'm not sure I got it on the approval piece.
So I think any director who has additional input can send it to the executive committee. But for now, I'm actually going to have you.
I actually want to suggest, I mean, I would like to get just to the point where if one of us has a proposal for a way to modify, that can be sent to staff. They can consider it and come back with something.
Yeah, so wait, I'm going to finish. So I'm going to ask, since the executive committee is taking care of it, I'm going to ask if anyone has further suggestions to please send them to Mr. Harrison by Tuesday. Mr. Harrison, can you make eye contact with me? Tuesday? Okay, by Tuesday, so that staff has time to take a look at it, consult executive committee if needed, and still have it posted in time for the next meeting. The other thing that I was going to say is that I would urge the next board to consider, and that would probably fall under GoalCom, to take a look at 0130 and clarify it. Of note, and Director Chu, I understand your point about making sure that the language is crisp in this policy to make it clear the difference between reports, plans, goals, objectives, tactics, metrics, all those different words that are used, strategies, targets, because when 0130 was written and approved, it was in a time when we had a strategic plan that had no goals. And since then, the plan has evolved and now has goals, and then our annual plan. But there's a lot of confusion around the word goals. And so some people think that our district has like 68 goals because it's written that way in some of the policies. Whereas really we have 5 goals in our strategic plan, and then we have a series of SMART objectives or other ways that support that in an annual plan to advance our main goals. And so it's an opportunity at this juncture to make this policy clear, but really some of those other policies that also call on things need to be clarified as well.
We can
So-
look at that, just so you know, the last update we did on 0130 made sure that things were called commitments and targets. There were annual targets and measures, and that's it. There were no goals included in that. So we can double check it, but that was supposedly that was part of our update, the last one.
Okay, so with that, the timer, basically broke. It's not even blinking anymore because we're so over time. And my computer probably died too.
Can I make a motion that we skip to item 6 on our agenda so we can hear the public comment? And that before we do, since Deputy Superintendent Collins had started by clarifying a lot of things regarding Puesta del Sol, that perhaps she just have a 10-second recap for the benefit of those who may not have heard it. That would be my motion.
I'll second your motion.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and do that? Dr. Jarvis, is it all right if you have Deputy Superintendent Collins, while I take a look at these and select randomly our public comment speakers, if you could just give a brief recap. Thank you.
Was that a nod?
Yes,
Looked like a
Eva.
nod. Okay, thank you. I do think a lot of people walked in after I had the opportunity to share earlier at the meeting, but just to recap that we did talk about all of the issues and concerns that have been relayed regarding communication and engagement of staff and families, and that we agree that it's important for us to pause and take more time and involve and engage our staff and families. And so we do have a plan moving forward for that, and that we really regret that it came to this point, and do appreciate all of the voices that we've heard over the past few weeks and will continue to hear and be involved. Does that sufficiently?
I think so. Directors, is there anything you want to add? Okay, so we have 7 public comments, and we usually have 10 minutes. But directors, I'm going to propose that with each commenter taking 2 minutes, since people have waited very patiently here, that we just take them all. Is there any
Second, or whatever you need.
or a second? All those in favor? Yes. Okay, so we're going to do that. So now we're on public comment, and I'm just going to read out the order that you're going to be. Oh, okay. So apparently the list has already been made. I shuffled them randomly, but there's already been made. Since we're going to take everybody, you'll get a turn. So I'm just going to say the board is grateful to receive public comment. If we can post the public comment up there, I'm just going to remind you that we have standards of civility that we request of everyone. And are they posted? They're up there? Okay. So if the first speaker is, all right. You can see your post there. The microphone is here. You have 2 minutes. There is a time. Do we have a timer? The timer will count down for your 2 minutes. You'll be asked to wrap up that sentence or so at the end of your 2 minutes, and so that we have time to hear all speakers. When you know it's here. When you know it's your turn next, you can start approaching the microphone, but stay distance. So thank you for coming. You have 2 minutes.
Gracias y buenas noches. Mi nombre es Rosalba Parra. Soy madre de familia y tengo 4 hijos, todos asistiendo al Distrito Escolar de Bellevue. Estoy muy preocupada y tengo muchas preguntas. Y yo quisiera saber, y vengo en nombre de mi comunidad, y quisiera saber por qué el distrito no nos informa a nosotros los padres de Stevenson los cambios que ustedes han venido teniendo. También quisiéramos saber dónde está esa voz que nosotros como comunidad hispana y latina muchas veces no se escucha. Y no se escucha porque no es que no queremos, es que somos madres y padres trabajadores. Yo soy madre soltera de 4 hijos y yo trabajo 12 horas al día. Yo no puedo asistir todo el tiempo y no puedo estar muy informada porque no es que yo no quiera, no puedo. Y tampoco hablo inglés. No es que yo no quiera aprender, es que no puedo porque trabajo mucho para sacar adelante a mis hijos, mis vecinos, mis señoras que viven a un lado de mí, son mis ojos, son mis manos cuando yo no estoy en casa. Cuando mis hijos van a la escuela, ellos me hacen el favor de ver a mis hijos y yo les pido, por favor, no nos saquen del vecindario a nuestra escuela. Por favor, se los suplico. Mis hijos necesitan estar cerca del vecindario y yo necesito mi comunidad porque no estoy en casa todo el tiempo. Muchas gracias.
I'm just going to interpret really quickly what she said. Why does the district does not want the families to know? Where is the community, the voice, the Latino voice? We need to be involved in this process. Our family appreciates and likes Stevenson, our dual language programs, our neighborhoods programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you would also mind translating, we just want to also emphasize that we do have a board phone number. And so comments can be left on that and it gets automatically translated and sent to all directors. And so we can, Ms. Gasparich, can you just say the phone number? Okay, she's going to share that phone number in a moment at the end. All right, so our next speaker.
Hello. I'm a parent of 2 boys who attend Puesta del Sol, and I'm here with other families of dual language and immersion programs in the Bellevue School District. And what we're here for is to respond to the most recent decisions from the district regarding changes to the language program that we're undertaking without community involvement. We just want to request a stronger commitment by the district to equitable, bilingual, bicultural, biliterate education for multilingual, bilingual, monolingual learners. It's something that we value, and we're looking for clear and honest communication from the district, right? It's what's missing. We value being part of the decision-making process and changes that affect our children's education and access to language learning opportunities. Consolidating language programs can negatively affect the employment and livelihoods of Latino teachers and staff. And so transparent, timely, and open communication is incredibly important for our school community to build and retain trust. We feel that some of our district values, such as integrity and collaboration, are being ignored and undertaking an approach that ignores community participation. The district received the analysis of communications audit recently, and we feel that the action items in that audit need to be reviewed and implemented. Most importantly, families did not receive any direct, timely communication from the district about the recent proposed changes, and we find the lack of transparency, communication, and community input incredibly problematic, particularly the community input. While Ptsa families received an email notification on October 29th, the dual language families haven't. We've been on conversations. Ptsa families have received an email notifying us of what's going on. Dual language program parents have not. Nothing about the proposed changes. Sorry, my time's up.
Yes, thank you for your comment. Next commenter. Thank you. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Juan Carlos Magaña. I'm a dual language teacher at Stevenson. I would like to communicate with the district and the decision makers in the district that the past couple of weeks with the proposed changes to the language programs has been challenging for teachers, staff, and families. I am concerned about the lack of transparency, lack of communication, and lack of community and staff involvement in this decision and proposed changes. This creates tension and challenges for both staff and families. This most recent issue is one of dozens over the past year that take our time away from our professions, our commitment to instructional excellence, and takes time away from our families. The district needs to communicate with transparency earlier rather than later. The families hearing about it secondhand is also incredibly problematic and affects the most vulnerable families whom we are supposed to be focusing on. These families have experienced extreme poverty, housing instability, employment instability, death, and not to mention immigration rates over the past few years. We can do better and can strive to be more inclusive for voices of our most vulnerable students and families. Let's work together for more inclusive decision-making in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next commenter. So commenters, you can be up here. If you're on deck, you can come up closer. All right, you have 2 minutes.
How am I gonna reach it? Hi, I'm Ariel and I go to the Sherwood Forest Dual Language Program. I'm in 4th grade and I love my school. I don't think we should make any changes, but if you're considering to, I would appreciate if you would ask the Spanish-speaking families what they want, since we would not have the dual language program without them. My whole class couldn't come to this meeting, but I am here to say the reasons why the dual language program at Sherwood is so important to them. Sherwood accepted me. It's like my home. It's a part of who I am. If you pull out the native Spanish speakers, our school would never be the same. Hola, soy Ariel y voy al programa dual de Sherwood Forest. Estoy en 4º grado. Amo a mi escuela y no creo que deben hacer ningún cambio. Pero si están pensando en hacerlo, por favor preguntan a las familias hispanohablantes qué es lo que ellos quieren, ya que no tendríamos un programa dual sin ellos. Toda mi clase no pudo asistir a esta reunión, pero estas son algunas de las razones por las que el programa dual en Sherwood es tan importante para ellos. He aprendido muchas cosas nuevas sobre diferentes culturas. Sherwood es como mi familia, como mi casa. Aquí me siento cómodo. Es parte de mi identidad. No quitas eso de mí. I also have letters and I encourage you to read them later. Thank you for the opportunity to speak for my class. También tengo sus cartas y los animo a leerlas más tarde. Gracias por la oportunidad de hablar por mi clase.
Thank you. All right, hard act to follow.
No, it's easy to follow that, huh?
It is.
La, la, la.
All right, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening. We appreciate the statement by Deputy Superintendent Eva Collins, but we still want to read the position statement we have because, like Directors Watson and Chu mentioned, we are also afraid this could happen again. As such, we continue to call for all stakeholders to be engaged, not just obvious ones.
My name is Emily Castle. I am the president of the Bellevue PTSA Council, and this position was voted on by the PTSA Council Board on Tuesday. The Bellevue PTSA Council Board takes the position calling for the school board and district to cease any action based on decisions made without using the critical criteria and full engagement of the community. We request the process in implementing the decisions regarding dual language and emergent instructional model, curriculum, and student placement procedures stop until adequate stakeholder engagement has been achieved. Stakeholders include, but are not limited to, teachers and staff at each school potentially impacted, primary and secondary schools, parent voices from each and every OSPI demographic reporting category represented, as well as PTAs represented at the schools and/or program being considered for development, change, or implementation, including all current and future families K through 12, community members, and the staff supporting programs K through 12. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next commenter. And you have 2 minutes.
My name is Joel Ingraham, and I'm with the Puesta del Sol PTA. And I'd like to start by commenting for the public so they know more about our language programs, because not everybody might be aware. I know you guys are intimately aware. But there are 9 language programs within the district: Puesta del Sol, Jingmei, Lake Hills, Stevenson, Sherwood Forest. Then we have Tillicum, Highland, and Newport, and Sammamish. These programs are incredibly valuable to our district. They're unique, and as you can tell, they're cherished. I appreciate everyone in this room. Everyone cares. I appreciate the staff and the board for their time, and I'm proud to be in Bellevue, because when we misstep, we can correct and move forward. So thank you. We worked with, there are 6 PTAs that put out a statement. If those signs can please be held at this moment, and then I will read the Puesta statement. The Puesta del Sol PTA board stands by the Bellevue PTSA council statement calling for the school board and the district to halt changes to the language program or school language programs. We urgently call for the district to pause, recognize the damage done, engage with the Bellevue community. We embrace positive changes to our programs, provided there is a comprehensive plan endorsed by families, educators, and other stakeholders. We stand with our fellow Bellevue language-focused schools and support teachers and staff. We believe that the district is operating with good intentions, seeking to provide better and more equitable education for our students. We call on district leadership to follow its own values of service, integrity, compassion, excellence, respect, and collaboration. We request that the district provide access to the data that they are using to support their proposed changes, and provide clear communication on all plans from this point forward. So I appreciate the progress that has been made tonight, and I look forward to being able to come back and talk about other important issues. We are still recovering from COVID as a district. We have yet to see some test scores, and I can't wait to talk about literacy. Thank you.
Thank you. And so with, so we have a new topic that's coming up, so I'll just say gracias a todos. And then for all of the comments on our immersion in dual language programs. And then we have a final commenter. Go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Carl, and I'm here today with my family to ask a question and also just to make a comment on mandatory COVID vaccinations for children. I don't know if the school district is considering mandatory vaccinations. It's something I'd like to know, so that's my question, if that's something they're considering. My wife and I personally are not in favor of mandatory vaccinations for children. I recently had the opportunity to read the emergency use authorization that the FDA had considered in order to approve the Pfizer vaccine for children 5 to 11. And I was surprised to learn some facts in there, such as that the follow-up on those children had only been 2 months. Despite the fact that in the same document, they say that for new vaccines, and particularly vaccines that are using new platforms like the mRNA technology, that they would want to see at least 6 months of follow-up. I was also surprised to learn that, when they compared the incidence of myocarditis in children who received the vaccine compared to the incidence of hospitalization for children at the lowest level of COVID-19 in our population in June 2021, that they found that actually the myocarditis was higher in those children. And so that may mean that by mandating vaccines for children, we're actually asking families to make a decision of being in the public school system, but potentially exposing their children to a harmful side effect of that vaccine. And that effect would be higher than the likelihood of hospitalization. And I'll take the last time just to point out that that may be an issue of equity, because families who are less affluent are less able to go and find alternative medical providers like a doctor of naturopathy who's willing to provide a medical exemption from the vaccine. Whereas we have personally experienced that pediatricians say that their practices are forbidding them from offering medical exceptions to the vaccination of children. So I just wanted to offer that for the board's consideration. And if you could remind me then, or you get back to the question, if the board has a stance on the mandatory vaccination. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so that concludes our public comment period. We'll note that the board has also received numerous public comments from a variety of perspectives to our email address, board, BOARD, @bsd405.org. We welcome comments. We do read the comments. We generally do not respond directly. Many of the comments we receive tend to be administrative and operational in nature, which are the purview of the superintendent and are often referred directly to staff. The role of the board is one of governance and oversight, and for many of you who've sat through the meeting today, you can see that it's a lot around the policy, which then need to be implemented for effective running of the district and with the outcomes of quality improvements for our students and everyone who's in our district. The phone number, if you'd like to leave a message, is 425-456-4270. And again, that messages can be written or left on the phone number in the language of choice, and they will be translated and relayed to all 5 board members as well as the superintendent and his staff. And generally in these meetings, the board listens to all comments carefully, but will generally not respond to comments spontaneously or without further deliberation. That is part of the law and requirements that we have to abide by the Open Public Meetings Act. So finally, again, I want to thank everyone for their comments, their time, their passion, and that makes our community stronger. And I appreciate the words from staff earlier regarding a commitment to ensure that we really are honoring the voices, and I look forward to hearing about a rich and productive dialogue and continuing to strengthen our district. So that concludes item 6.
Francine, just to let you know, there's a bunch of letters that came from kids, and so I'll hand these down so people can look at them tonight. But if you could just give it to Tish at the end, maybe we could send them back to the office to be scanned and sent out, but I'll still hand them down so you can see them. And then I think we received this one in email, but I'll send this down as well.
Why don't we try to finish the meeting and then we'll take care of them all at once, because we have still a lot to cover. Item 5, we're going to go back to item 5. That's board director updates. We did not receive anything in writing, so if there's anything else, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go on to item 5.2, which there's a memo there. Thank you, Ms. Gasparich, for putting this together. It indicates at the December 2nd meeting, that will be the annual meeting for the board of directors, which time we will swear in new board directors and elect new officers. My understanding is that there are multiple current board directors who are interested in the office of president and potentially vice president. We have 7 liaison positions that are currently included. What I'd like to take now from the board is if there's any recommendation on either adding or deferring some of these liaison positions that are listed. I will note that in addition to these, we do have some informal things. For example, Dr. Chu and I serve with weekly meetings with other local district representatives, continuing to work on creating a better communication channels with our city council. And I know each of us is in contact with other groups, affinity groups within the district.
I guess I'm unclear. What's the goal tonight? I mean, because this is listed as committees and the
So
feedback.
the goal is to announce that there are multiple people who are interested in the officer positions and to determine if there's any change to these liaison positions so that they can be updated and the information available for the December 2nd meeting.
So, well, fundamentally, I think we have a discussion, there's a discussion to be had about how we do committees and liaisons and whether we could reimagine it in a way that I think just works differently.
So, sorry, I understand. So currently, policy 1240 and 1240P stand. They have not been updated. The information has been collected, and now it's up to Goalcom to provide a first reading in terms of revising that policy. But for now, that stands. And considering that a first and second reading will not be completed prior to December 2nd, in terms of the annual organization, that will need to follow that policy. And these are the committees as they stand. So what can be looked at is the liaison positions. So is there any suggestions regarding those? Yes, Director Chu.
Two things on this, but one first on 1240. I did not get a chance to see if the 1240 notes from all the directors, like all the directors were given a survey. Are they posted in the board materials?
They were posted and then they seem to have disappeared.
Well, that's because it was the raw information.
There was a summary. There was a summary posted this afternoon, but then when I refreshed, it's.
So I think we need that there for Goalcom to be able to work on it so that we don't have, like, so that it's published at a board meeting what the comments were.
So we'll just make sure that it reappears. I'm not sure what happened, but
would we need, I mean, we have committees. Do we, 1240 establishes committees?
Yes.
I guess I'm saying we could have a discussion now about whether there is value in having committees. That could be a discussion we have that could be more relevant than having Goalcom go off on the side and come back with a revised policy versus having a discussion, which is what I thought the feedback was hoping to generate, a discussion. I don't think we need the feedback posted to be able to have use this time to have just a discussion about how do we want to use the.
I'm sorry, we do not have any time right now. So if the board wants to defer something else, which would be probably one of the study sessions at this point, to have this discussion instead, someone can make that motion. However, that would also require suspending the policy with this board to affect the new board to not have committees because there will not have been a first and second reading done to make that change.
So I would ask that we make time on the next meeting's agenda for some discussion because we were supposed to have that discussion here. We just ran out of time. So it was like, my understanding was it got booted off the agenda for time and nothing more.
No. I'm not sure. Do you mean what we're doing right now or
no,
under
the 1240 discussion, the idea that like whether or not like to have committees to consume the feedback that the board had given and to actually have a dialogue about it?
No.
I thought that was supposed to be on tonight's agenda and was booted off because of time. But anyway, I'm requesting, regardless of what the history is, I'm requesting, I believe Seem is on the right line of thinking that we should be having a conversation as a group. It would be meaningful to me to have that discussion before this board dissolves so that I benefit from your and Erica's inputs about what worked and what didn't about committees. Sure, we have the comments, but it's very different when you get participation. So I'd love to have that conversation because even if we keep the committees, I can imagine revisioning them or rethinking how they're organized and how they work and in ways that could really benefit from things. So I would like to ask that it be added to an agenda. And then I do have an actual liaison comment when you're ready.
All right, so actually the liaison comments in order as item 5.2 and then agenda planning would be your previous comment and that would be in order at that time.
Great, so I'll bring it up then. So my comment on this is I appreciate this concept of a WIAA rep, like everyone knows how passionate I am about activities in athletics, but it just isn't a thing, and I can pretend it's a thing and I can make it a thing and I can do useful things, but we can all do that with lots of things. And so I don't think it needs to be a voted position. Anyone who wants to can sign up for the WIAA updates. We have district staff who are representing us on the WIAA committees, and we as a board, if we want to influence that, we can do that through position, or we can, like, positions that we take with WASDA, we can do that through, there are many ways to do that. I don't think that we,
So that's fine.
like,
So-
I'm just not sure that that position per se, that it isn't anything. There's no meetings, there's no thing. I care about it, so I ask what's going on, and I try to advocate where I can, and I try to keep up with Jeff's sometimes here, and try to make sure you guys are getting the same information I have, so that we're all on the same page. But
Okay.
I think that's happening anyway.
All right, so that point's noted. Is there anything else? All right, so as a reminder, the liaisons are there for information, so please make sure that you've updated your current liaisonship. It's not something that's necessarily directly voted on. At the annual meeting, the requirement is to vote on the officers. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a thing, right? It's listed there. It could be removed, but currently we do designate someone to be the representative and report back as needed.
It just comes to mind that we don't list Bellevue Quality Schools here because it's intermittent, but it is a thing, and it is actually, you know, it's weekly for a short period of time.
I would add it to the list. I think
Yeah.
it's worthy of like recognition, because this is, when we post these lists, it helps our community know who's the point of contact, the primary point of contact.
Okay, anything else?
I also think we should reinstitute time once a month for us to actually orally talk about what's happening with these things, not necessarily to like just list off a bunch of stuff, but I think that it's very different than getting reports from each other to actually, but we can look at that long term. I just like to say that I miss being able to listen and understand how people consumed the different information.
Okay, so I've made a note of those ideas, and we can bring them up in the next meeting again, which we had indicated there would be that. I would refer everyone to read policy 1221, which covers liaisonships. And it may be something, again, that GoalCom wants to take a look at. So for example, it says there's a maximum of 2 consecutive terms for a board member. However, last year there was not a taker for a particular liaisonship, and so someone had to serve more than 2 consecutive terms. So, you know, what happens then? There isn't really a provision for that. So whether the policy needs to be amended, suspended, what needs to happen there. So I would just urge that to happen as well.
Christine just added some ideas, so I'm going to just say in 45 seconds, what I'd like us to consider between now and the next time we meet is the notion of maybe instead of having committees, that we consider having essentially areas of subject interest that could map to the kinds of things that many of us have expressed an interest in, and the liaisonships may tie to, but they may work better for us as topic areas, such as having somebody who is directly on point for community engagement, and the liaisonships that they would have would tie to that, such as community engagement would be PTSA, special needs PTSA, and affinity groups. That is then the point of contact we would have for that topic. They would be our ear to the ground on that topic. Communication could be another one. Student instruction could be another one.
Okay, so
rather than having it tied the way it currently is. And I'm happy to describe that better, but I think our current structure takes a lot of time and does not create transparency around key topics that should happen in the board meetings and instead are happening in the committees. So I would like to have more discussion of what happens in committees happening here in our board.
all right, so is there any further discussion on item 5.2? All right, so item 5.3, I've heard a request to add to the agenda time regarding a discussion on committees. My request is that that comes in the form already as either a first reading or an outline from GoalCom, since that falls under 1240 and that would fall under GoalCom's purview.
I think that's exactly the antithetical to what Seema just pointed out. We'd like to have the discussion here. It's not always just about throw a policy out there and vote on it. It's about like making sure that we get the input
I
from
understand
everybody.
that. It's still a request because we gathered the information from all directors and it's been summarized. And so there is a starting point for that discussion. So what we want to be able to have is a discussion and not just gathering information. And so that's part of the move here, because this is what happens when our meetings then expand to the point where we're not able to have discussion because we're just collecting the information. And so I'm just asking that there be a framework for a discussion that's provided based on the input that's already been received.
So if
Summarized means that the GoalCom committee won't see my original words that I wrote to those questions?
They have access to the information.
Okay.
They will. I think the issue here, though, is just whether or not, like, do we present, Seema has an idea, I have another idea, like, how many different proposals do you want us to bring? Instead of coming and saying, here are a few different ways we could go, what's your experience and how does that feed into it? We can look at other people's ideas, but collectively reacting to a few different things and then being able to move forward seems more productive. So we as GoalCom can go ahead and organize something for discussion. But the goal is that we will have something for discussion, and we're not trying to just move and plow something through. And I also think it's important, if we're going to change that structure, that while it benefits from the wisdom and experience of this table, that it also reflects the input from the two new people who will participate in it.
All right, so I've heard 2 requests for that. Is there a third request to add that to the agenda? So that's a maybe. Is there a third?
Yes.
I can put it to a, no, that's 2. So is there a third person who wants to add it? So our procedure is that when we want to add something to the agenda that's different than that's
Well,
there.
then I'll say yes.
Okay, so that's 3. So that we get 1, 2, 3. 2 of you already say you can't vote twice.
Vote on this? Sorry, I didn't follow what you were saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that concludes item 5. Item 7, do we have anyone here for the public hearing on director district reapportionment? Redistricting? Is there anyone here for item 7, redistricting director districts, public hearing? And a third request, is there anyone here for the redistricting director districts public hearing? All right, seeing none, that concludes our public hearing.
Wait, so that was just a public hearing? There was no updates for us on the questions that we asked to get answers on? Like the legal, sorry?
I think that's attorney-client privileged, the legal.
That's an attorney-client privilege document that you received.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I did not see it. I don't know why. I apologize.
That brings us to item 8, which is our break. Okay, so we have a break, and then there's a study session. So we will go immediately to the study session. You have, fine, you can have 8 minutes for the break. And I'm going to note that the study session, who's here for the study session? Is there anyone else here who's staying for the study session?
I'm staying.
Okay, so then we'll follow our procedure and go to the other room for the study session. For those who want to join, there's a link posted for the study sessions. I believe it looks like it's the same link, but it's posted here in the agenda for that. And then I'll come back and adjourn the meeting after that. But we're just going to go directly. We're not going to come back into this room to begin the study session. The study session will just begin promptly at 6:50. Thank you, everyone. All right, so we have concluded our study sessions. I made one announcement in the study session that I'm going to repeat here. It was with regards to a portion of the meeting with the executive session and our school visits. Policy 1400 indicates that our school visits should be approximately 3 hours long, and we are going to stick to approximately 3 hours long. However, we noted in the beginning, we tend to meet with our educators and staff first, half an hour right before the bell rings, which can sometimes be challenging. So we're going to adjust the next meeting just by 5 minutes so that we start a little bit earlier and then give people time to transition to classes. And with that, we are adjourned.